Hi, everybody. My name is Lily Allen, and I am Associate Vice President at Jobs for the Future. We are the design and technical assistance partner to the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions for the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund. Those of you who are old-timers in this work know that the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund is actually three intertwined initiatives. There's what I think of as OIIF Classic, the original. There is Opportunity Works, which is our social innovation fund effort, and that's what Jobs for the Future leads as part of the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund. And then there's the 100,000 Opportunities Initiative, and we are presenting lessons from that work across this convening. So Jobs for the Future works nationally, and we're often more in your communities than we are in our very own right here in Boston, but I am really pleased to be introducing this plenary because we have been walking alongside Boston over the last 15 years as they've been building out this work for Opportunity Youth. And before I introduce our keynote speaker, who I'm very excited about, I just want to say that there are a few things that are pretty amazing about Boston's story that you're going to be hearing. So one is that they have been very, very smart about using data, and they have used it consistently. There's always another data point that they need to tackle to drive their strategy. A second is that you will be hearing about their communications and their advocacy strategy, and they are starting with too big to be seen, which is a pretty amazing phrase to identify the population. Too big to be seen. That was, I think, over 10 years ago. They have been messaging around this population and the Opportunity Youth presence in our communities and their importance in our communities from the beginning. And then I'll just say they've also really, the collaborative and the backbones, the Private Industry Council and you have really worked on building, organically growing out a set of options for the population, so you'll be hearing about that. And Boston is also one of our sites for Opportunity Works, and so they are helping us build the evidence base for what works, and especially what works for young men of color. So I want to turn to introducing the mayor of the city of Boston. I actually never dreamed that I would be introducing the mayor of the city of Boston, but I am really pleased to do so. Martin Walsh was elected in 2013, took office in 2014, and one of the first things that he did was to help launch the Connection Center. And those of you who've been on site visits or worked in Boston know that it is the first in the country one-stop shop for Opportunity Youth who have a high school credential but are disconnected to re-engage. It is the first in the country. There are others that are following suit, and the mayor was really instrumental in launching that when he first came into office. A couple of other things, he's shown enormous commitment to the population of returning citizens who are young people coming out of juvenile justice system and seeking another chance, been enormously supportive of that work, and has really embraced Boston's Summer Jobs campaign. So he is a youth-focused mayor. The last thing that I have understood about the mayor is that he really knows how to talk to young people. Every single person I asked about this said, this is a man who walks into a room with young people and shares his own story very transparently as a way to help young people tell their story. So without further ado, I would like to welcome the mayor of Boston, Martin Walsh, to the stage.
Thank you very much, Lily, and thank you for that introduction. And when you said I never dreamt of introducing the mayor of Boston, I only dreamt of being the mayor of Boston. I didn't actually think I'd be the mayor of Boston, so I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone for coming today. This is an exciting forum, exciting conversation. I want to thank Ron Dorsey, the Chief of Education for the City of Boston. He's going to introduce the panel in a few minutes, so that role was taken away from me. So thank you, panel, for being there. I'm not going to mention who you are, but thank you for your work. I want to thank the Aspen Institute, Boston's Opportunity Agenda, the Boston Private Industry Council for being such a committed and generous partners here today, working on pathways to youth opportunities. And again, I want to thank everyone in this room who has something to do with young people's opportunities, because your work is incredible. I often think in Boston, we've been talking a lot about, we talk about crime stats and stats a lot in the city, and over the last 3 years in the city of Boston, Arrests have gone down, not including this year. Arrests are down 25% in the city of Boston. And if we include this year, and if it stays consistent, that number could be as high as 40% over a 4-year period. And that's because not of the work that we're doing, the police department necessarily, and individuals. It's the work of all of us collectively. I actually think the work is settling in, and some great things are happening because of all of the work in this room. So thank you for all the great work that all of you do. Not too long ago, it was standard practice that we wrote off high school dropouts. We just said, okay, they're gone, and we're going to push them over here, and maybe they find work, maybe they can't find work. And when I got into politics 20 years ago as a state representative, and I also a member of the building trades, many times I'd have somebody approach me with somebody who had dropped out of high school, and would try and get them into the building trades, or try and get some opportunities for employment, but there wasn't a lot of opportunities and doors opened at that time. In Boston, we realized that if we want to be a city of opportunity, we can't leave anyone behind. That's vitally important for us as we move forward here. And we can't waste anyone's talents. That's why we decided to do things a little differently in our city. We started asking young people who had dropped out of school what they wanted to and how they wanted to potentially get their education in another way. And then we decided to start doing things very differently in the city. And we created positions like the Chief of Education in the city of Boston. We created positions like the Office of Public Safety in the city of Boston. We're working on programs like reentry programs in the city of Boston. We're looking at things, how we do things. Back in the day, we started recovery high schools in the city of Boston, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We started looking at education a whole different way. And we found out as we did this thing that young people do want to get an education, young people do want to learn, and we're going to continue to move forward. But we also found out that we weren't providing the high school with alternatives. We weren't providing with out-of-school support and the second chances they need. So we started to build a network of allies, reconnect young people to education, to employment. Mark Culleton's here from College Bound, and there's some incredible stories that were written last week about the graduations at College Bound and the reconnections of people. And those are the stories that many of your different organizations can tell that same story over and over and over again. I'm proud of the youth opportunity youth movement. It's taking off nationwide because it's something that we need to do. I had some conversations already about making sure that mayors around the country understand the importance of what we're doing here in the city of Boston. It's thanks to the expertise and dedication of leaders like you and coalitions like the Boston Opportunity Youth Collaborative. In the end, it comes down to one thing: letting young people know in authentic ways that they belong. That their future is important and that their future is our future. It's not just them, and it's all of us together, and we have to continue to do that. As mayor, that's one of my highest priorities, and for me, it's also personal. Lily talked a little bit about my pathway, and I'm not going to go too much into it, but my pathway to this point as mayor was not a straight line. It was a crooked line in some ways. As a kid, having cancer, missing a lot of school, falling behind in my grades, never really truly catching up, getting into college, not getting into the college I want to, going to junior college to get my grades up, understanding while I was in junior college I could actually do the work. Went to Suffolk University, dropped out of Suffolk University because I thought it was more important for me to go and make money. And then, thank God, found my way back into college years later after a lot of struggles with alcoholism and other things, and getting back to college and getting my degree at the age of 40 years old at Boston College. And it's important that story be told, and it's important that a lot of you in this room tell your story, because our stories are all different, but they're very much the same. It's about perseverance, and our young people need to understand that there's ways of moving forward. And part of that was through education for me. And starting right here, the message is simple: you belong. And that's the message that we want to pass along to our young people. That's the same message that has guided Boston's transformation over the last decade. There were 56,786 students enrolled in the Boston Public Schools, and every one of them have their own story. There's no one-size-fits-all in our district. There's no one-size-fits-all when you come to young people at all. When we start looking and acknowledging that, we start to look at the results and how we change things. And in Boston, Boston's results have been staggering. About 10 years ago, our dropout rate was nearly 10%. And now it's only 60% of our BPS grads who are going to college. That was back 10 years ago. But thanks to many people in this room, and again, this isn't about taking credit. This is about working collaboratively, because that's truly how we're going to advance the ball down the field. But through many people in this room, we're able to turn all these numbers around. Our dropout rate is now about 5%. And nearly 3/4 of all Boston Public School grads are enrolling in college within 16 months of finishing high school. That's something that is really important. How do we do that? We built on early successes in Boston, working Boston's credit recovery movement and Boston's success initiatives. Success Boston's brought colleges and universities and philanthropic organizations together to double Boston's college completion rate, and thank you for that. The efforts were also complemented by when President Obama challenged cities in America to address the gaps facing young men of color. We answered the call in Boston. We launched the Mayor's Mentoring Movement, which came out of the White House, but more importantly, in some ways, not more importantly, they're important. If Marty Martinez is here, he'll yell at me. I don't mean that, Marty. It's important. If you're not a mentor, become a mentor. Sign up today. But we also launched the Boston branch of My Brother's Keeper. I think you heard Conan Harris talk earlier today. And not only do we have My Brother's Keeper branch here, but we jumped in with both feet because we can see the impact and we know the impact in young people's lives it can make, particularly young boys of color. And we're not forgetting our girls either. We're working to make sure that we continue to move our girls as well, move the advance for young women in the city of Boston as well. We furthered our Youth Options Unlimited, which reconnects youth with a history of court involvement, and Operation Exit, formerly placed incarcerated youth and young people into apprentices. And I could go on about that program and how that program is making a difference in so many people's lives. And when I talk about that number earlier of 25% less arrests and 40% if this number goes across the board, these are the programs that make all that happen. That's when our Opportunity Youth Collaborative really took off. After we talked about working to bring down the dropout rate, when we started to see that, we started to see these programs working together. And it couldn't have happened at a better time. It specialized in reaching young people who have a high school diploma who aren't taking the next step. Today, they're actually the largest group of opportunity youth in Boston. See, when I dropped out of school, when I dropped out of college, I had a father that was in the trades, and I had an uncle that ran a union. So I had the opportunity to be able to build a career if I chose not to go back to school. Many of the young people in our city today, when they drop out of school, they don't have that opportunity. They don't have that uncle that can help them get into the building trades, that uncle that can put them on a pathway to success. So we need to, in a lot of ways, do this work for them. Together, we opened and connected a connection center for disconnected high school graduates. And many of you can remember cutting the ribbon on that brutally sweltering hot day. And maybe that was a good thing because we haven't had one of those days really since then, so we'll get some good time coming back. But I remember thinking at the time, these kids are in the same exact position I was after high school. I didn't want to be in school. I felt in some ways inside of me, I was too embarrassed to say it, I felt that I couldn't do the work. In other ways, I just didn't want to be there because I didn't have that drive inside of me. But it's important that we can take this and make sure that because of this young people are going to hear the message that you belong. And that's something that we need to continue to push and move forward on. Of all the work that goes on along the way preparing our young people for college, our BPS grads are still struggling to actually pay for college. That's why last year we did something truly unprecedented in the city of Boston. We launched our tuition-free community college program for BPS grads. Again, another initiative pushed by Michelle Obama and the Obama White House. And again, Boston answered the call. And we were called down to a conference down the White House after some point before the presidency of Obama ended. We were down there talking about this program, and we were able to say, Boston was able to say, we have 2 community colleges, and now we have 3 that actually we're working to get our kids into, get them graduated, and move them on to the next step. And those colleges are Bunker Hill Community College, Roxbury Community College, and Mass Bay Community College. So I want to thank those colleges as well. This is another major barrier to higher education that we have knocked down. And we're going to continue to knock these down. And we're going to continue connecting the program to 4-year colleges as well. So we're going to take away all the obstacles and all the challenges that our young people have to go to college. And in some cases, the excuses. Because, they belong. We belong. We got to make sure that happens. Today, Ron Dorsey, Chief of Education, and our panelists are going to highlight those lessons and provide advice for our counterparts in other cities. Here's mine. First, understand that no re-engagement initiative should stand alone. You can't do it alone. Not one program, not one city, not one mayor, not one elected official, not one superintendent, not one person can do this work on their own. If you want to show opportunity youth that they belong. You need to show them that they belong at every stage, and that's education, that's career, and that's in their lives. In healthcare, we refer to the collaboration of different recovery partners as the continuum of care. When it comes to opportunity youth, we need to think of the continuum of mentorship. Graduates from high school is an important milestone in reaching a major indicator of future success. So we need to help our young people make sure that when they get into high school, that they complete their high school. But also, civic and economic engagement after graduation days are needed to be central to this conversation as well. A great example of this is Success Boston. It invests in getting kids ready for college, and it invests just as much in getting young adults ready for life after school. The road to success is a long one. We've got to be prepared to walk it together, and we've got to continue to let our young people know that we are there with them. Next, we need to acknowledge the opportunity youth are disconnected for a variety of reasons. As I said earlier, all of our youth are different, just like all of us adults in this room are different. Among them are systematic threats to success. Race, gender play a big role, especially in school discipline and the juvenile justice system. We cannot have a conversation about re-engaging opportunity youth unless we talk about inequities that cause them to be disconnected in the very beginning. Finally, it's imperative to make sure that young voices are at the core of our work and this work. We have heard the principle, nothing for us without us. When working with opportunity youth, this should be our mantra. Empower opportunity youth to bring them into this table. It's amazing that our youth can teach us once they know someone is listening to them. And I want to, again, thank all the young people that are here today. Thank you for being part of this conversation. Because you are the leaders of the future. And all the work that we're doing here today, if we don't have you leading by example, then in a lot of ways, it's your work that's going to help us move forward. And before I bring the panel up here, I want to recognize one of those young voices. Amanda Sabowicz, did I get it right, Amanda? All right, is one of the Boston youth leaders from the Boston Opportunity Youth Collaborative. Amanda works with the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative on Opportunity Youth Collaborative and Youth Voice Project. She has also organized many of our Youth Voice activities at the Aspen convenings. Amanda, I'm proud to present you with an award on behalf of the Aspen Institute. I want to bring you on up here. I know they prepped you 2 minutes before you had it, but come on up. I asked Amanda if she wanted to speak. She goes, no, I'm going to wait for the panel. So, again, as I walk off the stage, truly, I want to thank everyone for the great work you do. As I look around, I could give half this room a shout-out for the work you do and your organizations do. Those of you from Boston and Massachusetts, thank you. Anyone from out of town, welcome. Again, it's not about what we do individually. It's what we do collectively. Thank you very much.
I'm going to ask our panelists to come up, and I know you were just clapping, but let's hear it again for Boston's Mayor Martin J. Walsh. Let's also hear it again for Amanda Sabowicz, and we're going to have a little time to talk with her, but one of my favorite leaders in the city. So first of all, I want to welcome everyone to Boston and certainly welcome the network of friends and collaborators from Boston who are here today. We've been asked to tell you a little bit about the secret sauce of collective impact. There's a presumption in that we have the answers. We have a bunch of experiences. If you want the answers, you may need to talk amongst yourselves, but we're going to do our best to convey what we know. One of the things that I will say about Boston is it's a city where it's about 3 degrees of separation and not 6 degrees of separation. And so that may be one of the secret components here. There are people who don't work with each other, but they actually know each other. It's just an unproductive relationship. We can change that. So we have no excuse not to get the work done in Boston. The relationships are there, and the proximity is there, and the know-how is there. I'm accompanied by a great panel of folks who are going to tell you about the history of the work because they've led the collective impact work here in Boston. First of all, our friend Amanda Sabowicz. We've got the president of the Boston Foundation, Mr. Paul Grogan. The Recovery Center manager, my man, Manny Allen. Associate Provost at Bunker Hill Community College, Clea Andriatis. And the Superintendent of Boston Public Schools, Dr. Tommy Chang. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves a little bit more, but a few things to note before we get started. I've got some objectives for this conversation. First of all, we want to give you a little bit of the history of collective impact in Boston, tracing back through about 3 movements. First of all, our recovery movement, the Success Boston movement, and now the Opportunity Youth Collaborative. We also want to unpack some of the lessons and do some reflection here. And I was saying to Melody that we actually don't get to reflect very often. So this panel is an opportunity for us to take stock of the lessons that we've learned over time. Third, we want to anticipate where the collective impact work has to evolve in Boston to do this work more powerfully. So I'm going to start with Amanda and go down the row here and just ask you to introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us why it's important for you to be involved in the work of promoting young people's success.
Alrighty, so my name is Amanda Sabowicz, and so my story starts with that I went to a very prestigious high school in Boston, and I was fully miserable most of the time that I was there, but I thought that that's what you were supposed to do. You're supposed to go to a traditional high school and have that experience, but by 11th grade I was really disengaged and I felt like I had lackluster instruction, so I dropped out. And luckily, Manny exists, and so I was able to go to the Re-Engagement Center and get back into school. So I went to Boston Day and Evening Academy, which some of you got to visit yesterday. And then I was able to graduate in 6 months, and then got offered a teacher's assistant internship with my favorite teacher, so that was great. And then I volunteered my time there because I just loved working with young people, and I loved that place and being able to give back to it. And then I was hired in their postgraduate planning office, so I was able to help young people get connected to college or whatever their next step might be. And through that, I found Youth Voice Project, and it just lets me work with young people and give back to young people and help them in the same way that I was helped.
Thank you, Amanda. Paul?
My name is Paul Grogan. I'm the president of the Boston Foundation, which is Greater Boston's community foundation, a $1 billion, 100-year-old charity that has played a huge role in building the nonprofit infrastructure throughout this community. And it has been a priority of the foundation's forever to be deeply involved in education reform, and workforce development. And long before I got there, the foundation's early investments were critical in building the infrastructure that allowed the more current accomplishments to occur. My own work in this area started as a city official in the late 70s and early 80s, working in the administration of legendary Mayor Kevin White, who was very interested in these issues, and that was the period during which we created the Boston Private Industry Council, an absolutely indispensable backbone organization that has been the best in the country for years, and much of what we will talk about today would just have been unthinkable without the successful creation and sustenance of the Private Industry Council. And I was very pleased to be Mayor White's representative in putting that together with business and philanthropic leaders.
Thank you, Paul. Manny?
Hello, everyone. The reason why I'm connected with Opportunity Youth is really a kind of personal one. I was a high school dropout. I dropped out of school when I was 17. School was kind of always a struggle for me. I never really liked it. And finally, I turned 17. I felt like I was a man, that I can finally just walk away and try to live my life as an adult. So I did that. I left school. And when I left school, first of all, the only reason why I went to school in the first place is because that's what the girls were. That's what my friends were. I was a basketball player, and my mother expected me to be there. So when I thought I was an adult, I tried to act like one. But when I left school and I actually tried to live as an adult, I learned a lot of lessons. Really learned why school was important. The first thing I learned that school adulthood had not really much to do with age. It more had to do with money, because without money, you really can't live as an adult. So I tried to get money in a lot of different ways, and it led to me sort of getting a job at Walgreens. And I worked there for a while, and I realized that it wasn't going to bring me the freedom that I thought it was going to bring me. So at age 19, I went back to my same school that I dropped out of. I did 2 more years there, and I graduated at age 21. I had a guidance counselor who told me that I was intelligent and that I was a college student. And prior to that, I didn't really think about going to college, but I took his word for it, and I went. It took me 6 years of struggle to get through school. I worked. I still took care of my family. I'm the oldest of 7, I should say. And you know, I sort of got through that. And today, I'm actually about 3 classes away from earning my MBA at Northeastern. Thank you. So I share my story because in my work at the Re-Engagement Center, where I'm the manager there, it's all about the story. I tell my story to young people so that they can share their stories. I didn't realize the relevance of school, the importance of school, and so this is sort of what I do, and myself and my team, we do every day to sort of share our story and have students share their story, and also use my life and our lives as an example to kind of make it through.
Thank you, Manny. Clea.
So I'm Clea Andriatis, and I'm the Associate Provost at Bunker Hill. And this work for me really started with my first job out of law school. I was a prosecutor, and I ran a priority prosecution unit that was attempting to figure out alternative rehabilitative dispositions for chronic juvenile offenders. And it was really the first time I became really exposed to what the systemic barriers that Mayor Walsh talked about, and the impact that had on young people's ability to be successful. And I, at some point, started teaching part-time at a community college, and the connection between what community colleges were attempting to do for young people and the work I was doing with young people within the district attorney's office, and the work I was doing collaboratively with community-based organizations who were often instrumental in designing alternative dispositions for young people, started to really make sense to me. I thought this is an institution, community colleges are an institution that, when they leverage their experience well, can change the trajectory of young people's lives. And that's really why I made the shift from the law to education, because I saw an opportunity within community colleges that at that time I don't think was as activated as it is today. And I was really excited about that role that community colleges could and were playing in the lives of young people. And so my work at Bunker Hill is really just the next evolution of that, the work that I started more years ago than I'll tell you. So.
All right. And last but not least, Dr. Chang.
Good afternoon. My name is Tommy Chang. I have the honor of serving this community as the superintendent of Boston Public Schools. Previous to coming to Boston, I was a teacher, a principal, a central office administrator in LA. I worked in Compton Unified School District, LA Unified School District, and a charter school network. I come to this work with a deep, deep belief in values of equity, coherence, and innovation. I believe the young people who are currently in Boston Public Schools will be the leaders, the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the advocates for tomorrow. I come to this work because my experience teaching transformed my life. I was a teacher in Compton Unified School District. I taught at Compton High School, where I was a biology teacher, I was a softball coach, and some observations of school systems are this, and this was the mid-90s. School systems were very dependent on what I call Rambo educators. The Rambo educators, a person that does it themselves, right? Like the movies always seem to celebrate the Rambo educator. And we just know that that doesn't serve all kids. Number two, there was just a lack of opportunities. We believe young people fit one way and one pipeline. You try to squeeze kids into this set curriculum, and you hope that 100% of kids graduate, and that just doesn't work that way as well. And the third thing is, people were never at the table together to have conversations about a system of care for young people. There was just so much siloing. And as a result, what I saw with my own eyes were young people and families that get pushed out of schools. We don't have a dropout problem in traditional school systems, we have a push-out problem. And so that's why it's just crystal clear. I'm just so honored to be at the table, because I know that traditional school systems aren't always at the table to have these conversations. And if we truly believe 100% of our young people will have the opportunity to access a career in the middle class in our country, school systems have to be at the table as well. So thank you for having me here.
No, thank you. So before we go more in depth on some questions, I wanted them to introduce themselves at a greater level of depth, so that you know this community is a part of this community. The more folks that I've met from around the country doing opportunity youth work, I know that you do it because you have a passion and a purpose, and I wanted you to see the passion and purpose of the people on this panel today. Paul, you are the historian on the panel. That's not just a way of saying you're old. You are the historian and bring a lot of knowledge. I want you to take us to a time before the recovery movement. And I would guess that during this time, when we looked at issues of dropout, maybe we thought it was singularly a K-12 problem. When we thought about college, we thought it was either a K-12 preparation problem or a higher ed problem. In employment, we might have thought it was a labor force problem. What was Boston's aha moment that the challenge was really a multi-sector and multi-segment challenge that we needed to take on to ensure young people's success?
Well, I think we learned to ask the question, what would it really take to solve this problem? What are all the dimensions that are causing these young people to drop out? And I think that's a very useful question to ask at the front end of all sorts of endeavors. And indeed, it's what collective impact is supposed to be all about, is comprehending all the dimensions of a problem and realizing that in almost every case it won't be a single institution whose fault it is or who can solve the problem. And for such a long time in this country, and to an extent we still do, we look to K through 12 education to solve all the problems of society. And it obviously frequently overwhelmed our educators with the enormity of the tasks that they were being assigned. Whether it be racial integration of schools or matching the Soviet Union in science education, all the different chapters of the last century in what schools were asked to do or to make up for. So the breakthrough, I think, and it extends to more than the recovery effort, is the multi-dimensional aspect of these issues, and that a series of institutions have to be recruited to sit at the same table, take their own measure of what they can do to solve the problem. And we've taken that forward through the other endeavors, and I call it cross-accountability. It's no longer just this or that institution's issue to solve. It's up to a number of institutions, and if you answer that question intelligently, what would it really take to solve this problem, it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly who needs to be at the table.
So let me stick with you for a minute. So you helped us understand that you have to have a level of collective insight, ask the right question about what it's going to take to lead transformation, but how do you build the partnerships? Because we're talking about organizations perhaps that didn't typically work together or hadn't worked well together in the past. So where's the breakthrough in starting to create the operational connections between organizations?
Well, you know, I think political leadership is very, very important. We heard just a moment ago a tremendously passionate mayor who, despite the fact that many of the things we are carrying forward in this realm were not of his creation, but started before he took office, I think the mayor has been an incredible statesman in seizing on those things and making it clear how supportive he is. So, Ron, that part of establishing an expectation of cooperation and collegiality is that political leadership. But I also think getting everyone excited about reaching a goal that everyone could understand is another route to that. And finally, I would just say, and the mayor said this, it's not about taking credit. There really does have to be a core group in every initiative that understands the fair distribution of credit is really what's needed to keep everybody involved and keep everybody excited about what's going on.
Great, thank you. And just so that the audience knows, chronologically, we're really talking about the late 90s, early 2000s for the recovery work that's going on in Boston. One of the legends in the collective impact work and in all collective impact work in Boston is Manny Allen. And so, Manny, you had the role of really helping this collective will that was building around recovery and young people's success hit the ground. You had to actually start to reach out to young people, execute on this collective will. Tell us a little bit about what it took to make the work real after there was some higher level agreement across the city that we would support young people.
I mean, there's a lot. First, I would say we started off real simple. The Boston Public Schools, first of all, they were doing outreach efforts already, but just during the summer, it was a guidance counselor, actually my former guidance counselor, and then myself and my former colleague, who also was a dropout. He left school when he was 14, went back at 21, and went on to college as well. So we started making calls during the summer, and we carried that work throughout the school year. And we learned some really basic lessons. One, and as I look out at Kathy and Neil Sullivan, Kathy Hamilton.
Raise your hands.
I remember people. I remember people saying that we were really irresponsible to do this work, to bring dropouts back, bringing them back to what? You know, we had to sort of overcome that. We made calls, but the first thing we learned is that these students who were out of school, them and their parents, they actually wanted to come back to school. Mm-hmm. They were looking for ways to come back, and they didn't really know how. The other thing is that a lot of students who were out of school, they didn't really know how close to graduation they were. There were students who needed all credits. There were some who only needed 1 or 2. And from that work, what we realized is that students actually needed a place to sit and actually come and tell their stories. That's the other part. There was no engagement. Where students went to re-enroll, I would just say to everyone and say it was kind of like a registry or DMV. Anyone who registers a car knows that if you don't have all your paperwork together and you get up to that window, it's over. You know, it's come back later or something like that. And that's what our students were going through. They were young. They weren't equipped for that experience. So that's what the Re-Engagement Center set out to do is create that experience. Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about the work that you had to do with the Boston Public School system, because part of the collective impact work was asking the major system interfacing with young people to do some things differently.
So I would say it was a learning process for both them, and we do this work in partnership from the beginning with Boston Public Schools and then ourselves. So I had to realize that I had some stereotypes and assumptions of what was happening and what wasn't happening in the Boston Public Schools when I went there. And what I would say, the best way to answer that is to say is when you actually work next to someone and you see their struggles, you see what they go through trying to accomplish the same job that you're trying to accomplish, and that's help students, you sort of build camaraderie that way. And that's why in the beginning I talked about starting off really, really simple, because that's what it was. We went into what's now called the Welcome Centers, were then called FRCs, and this is where students actually re-enroll. And as we worked hand in hand trying to help these students, many of them who were 17, 18, 19, 20 and didn't know their options and had all kind of other things going on, because a lot of them were homeless, there's pregnancy issues. There was issues, and really listening to those stories and working hand in hand. That's sort of how we built. And the other thing I would say is that we learned some things were actual policies, and some things were practices that were easily changeable. And one that I would mention is a simple one. When students dropped out of school, they were assigned back to the school they dropped out of. Now that would work fine for someone like me. I had great relationships at my school. But for students who had a problem and they were out of school for a while and they sort of undergone this change, they realized that, okay, I want to go back to school, they would go back to that same school that they dropped out of, and they'll meet that same teacher or same administrator and say, you again? You're back here? And they would drop out again. So one of the first changes that we made from our collective work is that students have the option to go back to their same school, but they weren't automatically sent back there. They had the option to go to a different school. So it's just changes like that, simple changes that really make a great difference for our families and students in Boston.
So I'm going to ask you an unfair question here.
Sure.
The 2 or 3 things that you thought were game-changing out of that collective impact work around dropout and recovery?
Game changers. The one I just mentioned, that really was a game changer. 2, the re-engagement center itself, because that really was just a concept that some people believed in and some people didn't believe in, but actually having a place in the city where students could actually point to and physically go to and have a conversation about their lives without judgment, that was a game changer. And 3, I would say the re-engagement center. So I know probably around the country, and I don't know, maybe some people know what the concept of a homeschool is and not, but the bottom line is a homeschool is when I'm assigned to a district school, but I'm attending an alternative school. So that's a very confusing situation for students, because you have a school managing a student's education without the student actually physically being in the building, which causes problems when it's time to graduate, when it's time to get your grades that you earn put on your transcript, just a lot of different things. And so we were able to create, with the re-engagement center, now when we enroll students, we were able to enroll them to the re-engagement center so we can hold on to them, they can stay enrolled, and we can actively help them get into a new school. And just really having that level of coordination was really a game changer.
Wonderful. I just want to take a second for the folks who are in the room who are part of that movement with Manny, with the PIC and others, just to acknowledge you and say thank you for work that really moved the ball down the field in Boston. I'm going to ask the other panelists to bear with me for a second because I need to talk to the historian again. So we see transformation happening out of the recovery collective impact movement in Boston, but the goalposts started to move for Boston, and we started talking about college completion as the next set of goals. Bring us to about 2007, 2008, and the advent of what I would say was maybe the next or the second collective impact movement in Boston around Success Boston. Tell us why the goalposts were moving and how we got organized.
Well, this really was a seismic event in this whole process, and what brought it about was data that was previously unavailable. Boston had prided itself for years on having an unusually high college enrollment rate for an urban district serving mostly low-income and minority youngsters. No one had ever been able to find out, well, of all those enrollees, how many graduated. And we know that almost all of the benefits of higher education are associated with completion. Going to college and not completing, all the data says, that really doesn't do much for you. So we did the study that was now able to be done. The Boston Foundation paid for it. It was done by the Private Industry Council and Northeastern University. And the results were devastating. They were able, with precision, thanks to something called the National Student Clearinghouse, to determine exactly what happened to every young person who had graduated from the Boston Public Schools. So it wasn't an estimate or a sample, it was what happened to every kid. And the results were that only about between a third and 39% of those who enrolled in college were obtaining any kind of degree up to 7 years after their high school graduation. And this was a devastating result. We knew it would be, particularly given the pride that the city and the mayor and others had taken in the high college enrollment rates. So again, with the Private Industry Council, we were able to work with Mayor Menino in advance of the release of this study so that we would have something to say about what we were going to do about it and what would be, regarded as bad news, fairly. It was splashed all over the front page of the Boston Globe. It was devastating in a way when the study came out. But because we'd done the advance work with the mayor, we had at least the kind of set of ideas about how we might attack it. And that led to the Success Boston initiative, which I'd be happy to describe at some point. But I think it does show how important data can be. And as painful as this study's results were, it performed an incredibly valuable service that might not have been performed in any other way, to be honest. And so I think that it just reinforces, get what the real picture is. And every city in America should do this study. And I'm sure the results would be similar or even worse in many cases. But in our case, it was catalytic, and without really knowing what's really happening, you just can't get in gear. So I would just underscore the role that data and some skillful public affairs management of the data and the release of the data, that was an indispensable companion to have this be the positive result that it ended up being.
So Clea, the Success Boston data come into view. The story is being told about college completion success or lack thereof. Bunker Hill Community College responded in an urgent way. Why was it important for Bunker Hill Community College to be among the leadership and at the forefront of this Success Boston movement, where we're trying to get to higher college completion?
Well, the reality is that significant numbers of Boston Public School students start their college education at Bunker Hill Community College. And so we saw ourselves as a critical first step in that completion agenda for many students. They were either going to complete at Bunker Hill or they were going to transfer and complete somewhere else. But for many Boston Public School students, the handoff from their pre-college experience was with Bunker Hill. And what we really started taking a much closer look at was, what does that experience, how do students experience that? And it was interesting, when Manny was talking, many of the concerns that they started to identify about how students were experiencing the possible re-entry into the public school system were many of the things that we started immediately addressing about how students enter college. College for many young people is a set of experiences, a language that they and their families aren't familiar with. And we were dealing with a very large enrollment surge. We were having large numbers of students enter the college, and to be frank, we probably weren't as aware of how students were experiencing that process, that transition, as we should have been. And we started looking at a number of things. And one was, how do we be a more welcoming institution for students and their families when they're entering our doors? And there were a number of things, and this idea of what's a policy and what's a practice became and continues to be very important in that work, because some of what was happening was just because of the way it had been done forever and ever. And those were changes that could be made over time and have been made over time. Another thing that became important based on national research and our own experience was that we had large numbers of students, Boston Public School students and other students, who were entering Bunker Hill and being placed in pre-college level coursework. And the national research about the percentage of students who complete their education starting in developmental coursework is and was grim. So we knew if we didn't address the issue of developmental education, we weren't going to move the needle on completion. But obviously, and historically, a lot of that conversation was the unproductive conversation you described, which is they're not ready because K through 12 didn't get them ready, or they're not ready because you don't test them right in college. And we basically stopped having that conversation because it was not productive and it didn't benefit students. And we really moved to a model where we brought our partners, both community-based organizations and the public school systems in the area, and said, what can we do to ensure students can accelerate through developmental ed, or in many cases skip developmental ed, and still be successful in college and complete? And one of the important game changers in that conversation was really about a meaningful, truthful, transparent look at curriculum alignment. What became clear was that just because somebody is ready to graduate from high school does not mean they are prepared to enter college-level coursework. And some of that, most of it, has nothing to do with intellectual ability. It has to do with meaningful, intentional preparation. And that's the kind of collaborative, project-driven work that we started to engage in to ensure that we could get students into college as smoothly and productively as possible and set them up to complete in a timely fashion.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit about the solutions to what you learned, because part of what you just described was we learned a lot more about young people and the barriers to their success. So talk us through a little bit of the college's response, and also share with us a little bit about success coaching, because this has been one of the hallmarks of the Success Boston movement.
Absolutely. One of the things that we were really focused on, as I said, was this idea of how do we create a smooth transition from high school to college. And the success coaching movement that really came out of the Success Boston work was critical in enabling that to happen. The practical reality is we just don't have enough staff at the college to ensure that every student has an opportunity to necessarily work one-on-one over time with a skilled coach to ease their transition to college. And what the Success Boston coaches have enabled us to do in collaboration with the community-based organizations is really start those conversations with young people while they're still in high school. And so it's not like a bell goes off when you graduate from high school and suddenly you better start getting ready to figure out how to deal with college. That process is happening over time, and it's happening with success coaches who are grounded in the communities that these young people live in Boston, and organizations that they're connected with often during high school. So that has really helped Bunker Hill position itself to receive those students and continue to work with them in as productive a way as possible.
Great, thank you. Just a couple of notes for the audience. So the success coaches are not just Bunker Hill Community College employees. They are employees of the PIC. They are employees of our youth-serving nonprofits. So this was a way that Boston was able to leverage the capacity, one, of trusted individuals that young people trust in the city, and organizations who have capacity to support them starting at the high school level and all the way through to college completion. So when we talk about the collaborative effort and the collective impact, it is about leveraging many of the sources of capacity across the city as well. Tommy, want to ask you, BPS has been at the table for both of these movements, the recovery movement and the Success Boston movement. You said in your opening comments that it's rare for school systems to be at the table in collective impact movements. Tell me why you think it's important for them to be there, and help me understand what some of the tensions might be. You and I talked a little bit earlier, and what I raised with you is that school systems are oftentimes the object of the critique and of the change that other stakeholders want to see, and it's not a comfortable position for district leaders oftentimes, but you have a deep value for being at the table. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yep, appreciate that question. I think the orientation of most traditional school systems is, let's get our young people to graduate from high school, right? So you hear the 100% graduation, that is our goal. You hear that as the goal for most school systems. Well, I could get 100% graduation in Boston Public Schools if I lower the graduation requirement to such a low level that every kid graduates. But that doesn't solve any problems. I really think that our North Star needs to be guided differently. It needs to be about both college, it has to be about career, and it actually has to be about life. And I've learned a lot from the Opportunity Youth movement, and let me tell you about some of the things that we're trying to do differently in Boston Public Schools because of it. And I don't think Boston's the only school district doing it. I think a lot of school districts are seeing this work being important. I want to talk about it in three different buckets. I want to talk about the academic work and the instructional work we're trying to do in Boston Public Schools. I'm going to talk about the work we're doing around discipline, and then the last bucket is around kind of career pathways. So let me start with academics. Our instructional work within the school system is guided by ensuring that there is rigor in academic rigor in every single classroom. It needs to be guided by values associated with social and emotional competencies. We need to make sure our young people are developing social awareness, the ability to build relationships, and those skills I think everybody in this room is quite aware of. The last thing about our instructional program that isn't widely as talked about nationally is something called culturally and linguistically sustaining practice, our CLSP work. What is culturally and linguistically sustaining practices? It's this deep belief that every single young person has strengths and assets that they bring to the table. That nobody is quote unquote average. Like Todd Rose talks about the end of average. Yes, we gotta get rid of this notion that there is an average child. That every single child will come into a classroom and be able to bring something and contribute something to it. This is personal work to me. I was an immigrant to this country. When I came to this country, I remember my identity was dismantled the first day I stepped into a public school. It was the public school system in America that dismantled my identity. I lost my ability to speak different languages. I lost my identity as a Taiwanese person. And so, but we see this all the time, right? Our young people come from rich cultures and histories of resilience, but we dismantle that, like when they come to schools. So our instructional program is guided by these values: academic rigor, SEL work, and then our culturally and linguistically sustaining work. So we want to reinvent what instruction should look like in schools. The second thing is around discipline. We need to make sure every classroom, every school is safe and welcoming to every single one of our children. We need to make sure we have multi-tiered systems of support, especially dealing with some of the challenges our young people are bringing into our schools. But we have to make sure those support systems are in place. And when those support systems are not in place, that's when we get those push-out problems I talk about. It starts off with a child not bringing a pencil to classroom. That lack of a pencil escalates into a defiance issue, turns out into a violence issue, and then a kid gets kicked out of school. And we see that sort of pattern all the time. And so we gotta make sure we have that sort of, all those systems in place to make sure that doesn't happen. And the last thing is around career pathway work. We're in the midst of doing some massive redesign of our high school programs. I wouldn't say our secondary programs. This work actually starts in our middle school grades as well. And then it can't be just about academic rigor, it has to be about career pathways. So what our young people are learning in class or in doing in class should be both rigorous and relevant. So we're in the midst of redesigning two of our high schools. One of our high schools will be both the high schools will be using a linked learning model. Those from California, I think there are some people from California. Linked learning is something that I actually started in Boston, but kind of California stole, and we're going to steal it back over in Boston. But it is making sure our young people get career experiences over the course of their high school career, that they are getting internships, they're getting summer jobs, they're getting mentors, they're learning things in class that are relevant to the pathway they're in. So we're redesigning two high schools right now. One's going to be redesigned around two pathways, one around communications and another pathway around innovative technologies. And our other high school will be around business and finance. So I'm really excited about redesigning high schools with this framework. But this work is hard, turning an orientation of a school system from just graduation to college, career, and life is not easy. We have to deal with some bias work, and we've been doing that. It is about redesigning curriculum, and that we know in a system like Boston, which has leveraged autonomy as a theory of change, it is hard to change curriculum, bring everybody to the table on it. And last thing, it's kind of one-on-one organizing work. As a superintendent, I want to know every child that's expelled from BPS. I need to understand every single case because our executive team needs to understand what caused this issue. So we can have those sort of courageous one-on-one coaching conversations with principals and teachers to make sure that this work doesn't, we dismantle the school of prison pipeline work. So it is hard, it's courageous work, it's heart and mind work, right? So it's heart and mind work. I went the other way. So.
We often say that BPS is on the move, and it's evident that BPS is on the move here, Dr. Chang. Just by way of some summary before we move to the next chapter in collective impact, I think that there are some lessons that are coming to me more clearly than perhaps they have, because we often don't get time to reflect. So first of all, for Boston, it's been about asking the transformative question, getting above the level of the individual organizational challenges or individual discipline challenges. It's also about data, and I could probably stick data in at every step here, but as Paul said, making sure the data brings us to the hard truths and some of the courageous conversations that we have to have. It's also about recognizing the differences between the practice and policy changes that need to be made and responding accordingly, differentially doing the problem solving around policy and practice that has to be done. It's been about leveraging community capacity. So it's not just about the major systems, it's not just about the major funders, but it's about the ecosystem of resources available to young people. And finally, it's been about responsive and courageous systems change, which is what Dr. Chang just explained. And I think those elements have gotten us to a place where early on we cut the dropout rate in half. We're now talking about 70% of BPS students being college going, 50% completing in 6 years. We aren't where we want to be, but yes, let's clap for that. We aren't where we want to be, but we know that we are making substantial gains. Now, I would argue to you that that work helped us really address the needs primarily of 16 to 19-year-olds in Boston. And so about 2010 or so, we recognized that we had probably about 9,000, 10,000 young people in the city who were 20 and older. They had high school credentials, but they had not moved on the educational pathway or the career pathway. There were young people that we were leaving behind, and they're the same young people that you are working with nationally. Amanda, this is where we get into a new set of collective impact work, and I think arguably we start to shift the paradigm and really thinking about more youth-led work here. Now, we've been good in some areas and not so good in other areas, but tell us why, particularly in the opportunity youth work, it's been important for there to be strong youth voice, and tell us where we're getting it right and where we're not getting it right.
So I think the first getting it right was that the first iteration of Youth Voice Project was the one that went out and did surveys of young people to find that gap, that 20 to 24 group was just not being serviced. And we went to the Opportunity Youth Collaborative with recommendations for a drop-in center and for life coaches, and that got implemented. That's the Connection Center. That was from young people's research and young people's voices that led to the Connection Center that now serves young people. And I think that over my time in Youth Voice Project, I started in April 2015, and Youth Voice Project has really become ingrained in the collaborative. We're colleagues with our collaborative members, and we sit on the planning committees, the subcommittees, full meetings, and we really genuinely feel respected. And then I think areas of growth is that it's a total mind shift. You have to understand and have all partners understand and be on board with the idea that if you don't have young people at the table, when you're talking about young people, then whatever you come up with is going to be flawed, it's going to be incomplete, and it's not going to be sustainable.
Wonderful. Let's hear it for that. So think through some of the experiences that you've had. Was there a moment, a picture that you can paint for us where at the end of that event, at the end of that meeting, you kind of said, we got it right there. Young people were represented in the way that they should be. They were able to represent themselves here. Paint that picture a little bit for us of an instance where we really did get it right.
So last year, Youth Voice Project wanted to host our very first own event. We've done a lot of collaboration with other youth leaders across the city, and we thought, about this theme of displacement and instability, and we were trying to find a way to engage young people to share these different ways of displacement, these different systems that have pushed them out and how they've been unstable in their lives. So we kind of thought of this idea of a talent show, and we kind of had to work with the collaborative a little bit to kind of really express the importance of the arts for young people, that not everybody could just come up and speak testimony, and that's not their outlet, that's not their way of getting to their truth. So when we had our talent show, I remember just seeing members of our collaborative engaging with all of these young people from across the cities, from all walks of life, and I was like, this is right, this is good.
Where do we need to grow? Because I'm sure you can identify some other instances in which you said, that wasn't quite right. Where do we need to grow?
I just think, I think making sure that the relationships are built and they're genuine, they're not using young people for their story or to leverage something, that the relationships have to be genuine and that they have to be involved in every step. There's no excuses not to engage young people. It is not hard. They are out there, they want to talk to you, they want to be involved in decisions that have to do with them.
Great. Thank you. One of the breakthroughs in the OYC work was the creation of the Connection Center. Why do you think that concept is important for young people, and why it was the right move for Boston?
I think the idea that they can go to a location at any point and they can meet with a coach immediately, that coach is going to sit them down and talk with them. First, doing just like general intake conversations that aren't formal, they're very casual and it's very getting to know you. And then the idea that coach is going to stick with you. They're going to stick with you when you enroll into a program. If you don't get into a program, they're going to find you another option. And they're really going to try and make sure that you succeed, and that'll be somebody that's there for you all of the time.
Wonderful. Tommy, let me come back to you real quickly, because now that we're doing opportunity youth work and Boston is focused on ages 20 to 24, arguably it's not a cohort of young people that Boston Public Schools pays attention to. It's about a set of goals that are beyond the mission of the K-12 system, but again, BPS has been at the table in this collective impact movement. Why is it important for BPS to be here in this space where you might say not clear what the immediate connection is?
So BPS does serve. We do have a lot of young people who might be overage, underaccredited, and some of our most innovative work in our system are actually in our all ed spaces. And I'm really intrigued at schools are trying to get rid of the seat time requirements. Schools are trying to be more competency-based. Schools are saying to young people, you don't have to show up at 8:30 and go to 6 different classes where you're going to hear a teacher lecture at you and you have to take notes and regurgitate information. Like, let's rethink what is it the school experience should look like. And we have some very interesting models for it. BDA, I think some of you visited. We have Ostagai. We have a number of different schools that are trying to rethink this, what a traditional school system should look like. And I think that the more traditional schools are actually learning from those places. So I'm really intrigued about that work. Secondly, I think that we have to learn where we got it wrong. So when we did push kids out and when we did not get a young person to graduate, we have to learn from those experiences to come and inform the kind of strategic work we're doing within the school system. So that's why we have to be at the table. And we created an office this year called our Opportunity Youth Office. It reports to Dr. Amalio Nieves. I think I can call him Dr. Amalio Nieves now. He's our Assistant Superintendent of Social and Emotional Learning and Wellness. We reorganized our wellness departments, our athletics, our discipline work, our opportunity youth work, our social and emotional learning work, all under one umbrella to bring coherence to all that work, and that's all led by Amalio Nieves. Yeah.
Dr. Nieves, raise your hand, please. Thank you. Clea, do we have to plan any differently at the community college level for the success of Opportunity Youth? One of the things that President Pam Ettinger has said to me is that the average age of college students is going up. At Bunker Hill, it's approaching 27 years of age. So when you consider that those young people are at a different stage of life, what are some of the things that the college has to do to ensure that they are going to succeed?
Well, I think a certain amount of what we need to do is what we need to do for all students. And obviously, because our average age is 27, opportunity youth are very much in that universe of the average age of our students. I think, though, there are a couple of things that we see with opportunity youth that we are paying particular attention to. One is that they tend to be a population that is really interested in understanding the connection between what they're learning and a future in work or transfer. And so contextualized learning, ensuring that the learning that's happening really makes sense to opportunity youth in terms of where they see their future going or being is very important. I think another important piece of this is that often opportunity youth are people who don't necessarily fully believe that they are college material. And so it becomes increasingly important that as we bring them into the institution, they are constantly being told and reminded that they are college material, that they have, as Tommy said, they bring a wealth of experiences and background to Bunker Hill that has value and is the stuff that your education can build upon. So while for the most part it's not dramatically different, there is an awareness at Bunker Hill that this population needs to be attended to in some specific ways.
Wonderful. Amanda, let me ask you, this has been a very education-centric conversation, but the Opportunity Youth Collaborative has really recognized that there are some multi-system challenges that we need to work out on behalf of Opportunity Youth, and in particular through the conversation around prison to pipeline work. Say a little bit more about why, in particular, the Youth Voice Project has focused beyond the scope of education to really think about the work that we need to do.
So Youth Voice Project took on a kind of a social justice lens for everything because these issues affect young people. If we're going to talk about the school to prison pipeline, we're not just talking about it through the lens of schools. We're talking about the fact that there are racial inequities and those need to be dealt with. We need to dismantle the whole system before things will get better in schools. And I think that we took it on because it's what hurts young people. We really try to work with the community and the young people in our city to figure out what's bothering them. And if they're saying unfair suspensions is what's bothering them, then we need to get to the underlying reason for those unfair suspensions.
I think that this work that Amanda is talking about is perhaps some of the first really youth-led movement work that's come out of collective impact in Boston, and I'm very excited to see the work. I've been at tables that young people have led where the school system had to come in and ask, what do you want us to do? Public safety and law enforcement had to come and have very hard conversations sometimes, not only to find out what they need to do, but I think in some ways to coax them into the acknowledgement about the reality of the school to prison pipeline. So there is work to be done, and that young people are leading that work matters tremendously in Boston. I want to add to the list of elements that we talked about, a couple that I think just emerged from this part of the conversation. First, there are cross-system processes that are emerging that are important. So when you think about success coaching, when you think about some of the other work that we're doing, we're creating ways to work across systems and build some seamlessness. It's also about a few third spaces as well. And so the Connection Center is an example of a third space that doesn't sit squarely in some of our systems, but is necessary to provide glue and to provide something that doesn't exist in the ecosystem that will benefit young people. We've only got a few minutes left before we go to questions from the audience, but I'd like you each to tell us, what do you think the next evolution of collective impact work is in Boston if we're going to move progressively and swiftly towards some of our goals? And we'll start with you, Manny.
I guess I answer that question a little bit differently, because I just like to keep things simple. I think the key to what we do in Boston is just simple. So let's start from the student perspective, and then the conversations we have. It's really about, and this might sound corny, but it's really about just love. Just really, really understanding that people, young people, and people in general just want love. They want to be respected, you know, and they just want to be engaged in a respectful way. You know, I think that's what makes the re-engagement center work. When I think about the collective impact work, that's what happens. People come to the table, they sit there, and when it's done wrong, people are not being respectful, not showing love, and arguing, and really, really holding on to their titles. And I think, and so when I think of the next level, so for instance, we said we cut the dropout rate in half. We know that the half that's left is this different than the first half. So it's going to be different conversations. It's going to be different people that need to be brought to the table. You know, so I really wanted to, I guess, say that, because I feel like that's something that people can bring back to their cities. It's really about, like, and I'm talking about even on a physical level, showing love, showing respect, and just having open conversations and taking off your title to make things happen.
So when I underscore that this is one of the legends in the movement, this is one of the legends in the movement. Amanda, let me ask you next, and Manny kind of opened the door. You can take us to a more provocative and insightful place, or you can tell us what you think the next evolution of collective impact work is in Boston.
I think if I could, do something, it would be to start a collaborative, but it's just young people, just young leaders across the city of Boston, because we collaborate so casually and we all work with each other very informally. But to have that formal structure and that formal backbone, I mean, it's amazing what we've been able to do with our adult collaborative, but to have a youth collaborative, it would be just ideal.
Wonderful, wonderful. Clea, let's come to you next.
So I think that one of the ways we can continue to leverage the partnerships that are so instrumental in the collective impact work we're already doing, or one of the ways I think we have to leverage the partnerships, is to really start addressing some of the underlying personal barriers to student success. Bunker Hill was recently part of a survey done by the Wisconsin Hope Foundation, and we learned some pretty startling statistics about our students in terms of homelessness and food insecurity. So about 66% of our students, of the 750 students who were surveyed, identified themselves as either homeless or home insecure. About 56% identified themselves as food insecure, and of the students who identified themselves as food insecure, over 50%, over 60% were in the opportunity youth age range, between 21 and 25. And so I think that if we're really going to move the needle on completion, one of the places this work has to go with a sense of urgency and intentionality is to address some of these underlying personal issues that keep folks from being able to be successful.
And I think that really is cross-system and cross-institutional work. Nobody can do it alone. Tommy, we'll put the question to you.
So I said the work is about preparing young people for college, career, and life, and we've created the kind of the piping from K-12 to college. And in some parts of our school district, we've created the piping from K-12 to career. But we don't have truly a system that guarantees the 4,500 young people that graduate or potentially can graduate from BPS every single year a pipeline from K-12 to some college to some sort of career. And there are some prototypes of this. State Street's doing some interesting work with us. They're guaranteeing 1,000 jobs for BPS students over the next 5 years. Yesterday, the mayor and I and the governor had the opportunity to announce a partnership between the O'Brien and Mass Maritime, where students from the O'Brien, graduates from O'Brien, can attend Mass Maritime, actually take college coursework in high school, matriculate in Mass Maritime, graduate, and be guaranteed a job, and it's all debt-free. So if you think about, if we can create all these different pipelines, and you say to our most marginalized young people, you can get through these pipelines, you can get through debt-free, and 6 years after high school graduation, you will be in a career that will guarantee you a middle-class life. Now you've given hope to young people. So let's create all these pipelines and let's get this right in the city of Boston, because a place like Boston, an innovative economy like Boston, a place that has so many resources, so many colleges and universities, I think we can create a pipeline for our young people.
Wonderful. And Paul, our historian, you've now been a part of 3 waves of collective impact movement. Where do we go?
Well, the problem with speaking last is the good ideas have been put out there, but I think the superintendent is a very wise man. It's got to be all about jobs. And we have a very special opportunity in this city and in this region because of the course the economy has taken and the course the labor market has taken. It is an incredibly tight labor market. It is going to be so for a very long time. We have the most, just to confirm Ram's characterization of me, we have the most rapidly aging population of any region in the country. Our birth rate is below replacement levels. If it weren't for immigration, the whole region would be going backward in terms of population and backward in terms of economic viability. But that is an opportunity because employers are motivated, as they rarely have been, to look at doing things differently and look at people that they haven't looked at before. We've got to forge the connections, and some of them are already in place. Again, my favorite example of the Private Industry Council runs the very best private sector summer jobs program in the country, and they've been doing that for more than 30 years. It's incredible, but it needs to be built upon to take a more comprehensive approach. So I think the collective impact approach could get some big wins in the employment area.
Wonderful. Before we take questions from the audience, I want to take a minute to acknowledge your friendship. Thank you for the wonderful colleagues that you've put up with me in a number of settings, and so that's no easy task. But you've been wonderful here. So folks, let's give it up. Dr. Tommy Chang, Ms. Clea Andriadis, Manny Allen, Paul Grogan, and Amanda Sabowicz. And we've got some mics out in the audience. We will take all questions. It's just me, so. All right. And yes, be kind.
I'm going to be Phil Donahue. And just run around.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Karen Mapp, and I work at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I have a question because I was just asked by some of my students who are graduating tomorrow, I think, or the next day, about their opportunity to partner with the Opportunity Youth in Boston. Some of my students, particularly my Black and brown students, or my students whom I might describe as woke, are feeling like they're disconnected from Boston, and they don't have a real place to go to be helpful. Some of them are only here for a year, others obviously are here for 4 years. I'm just wondering, what can both we do as university faculty and administrators to contribute to this, but also what are the intersections between our youth, who themselves, some of them have been Opportunity Youth, right? And being able to contribute. And they don't want to be saviors. That's not what they're interested in. They want to be very respectful, but they do want a more intentional connection. So I was wondering if members of the panel could talk about maybe some opportunities there.
Sure. I don't know if folks want to jump in, but I'll say a couple of things to get us started. First of all, I think what the panel has illustrated is that a lot of the tables have been created. Part of the responsibility of those tables of multi-stakeholders is to create a place at the table for the next person. And so I think that we've done a good job about doing that. And so part of what we need to do is let your organization know, let other organizations know, here's the work. Here's what we're doing, and here's when we're doing it, to allow for that. Part of what we need to do in creating the place at the table is also convince your students to stay in Boston as well. So when we hear young college graduates and young professionals, particularly of color, telling us Boston doesn't feel welcoming, I haven't connected to the community. There are probably 5 to 10 tables where the community is building in Boston, and we need to create some more transparent ways to connect. I'll turn it over to some of our panelists in case you want to add there.
I'll speak about a potential opportunity. We've been working in Boston, and this is legacy work. This is not work I started, but making sure the adults who are in front of our young people in classrooms and leading our schools represent the diversity of our young people, and there isn't a match at this point. And I do believe long-term, the only way we can deal with this issue is if the young people who are currently in our classrooms become the educators in our school system. So we gotta create that sort of pipeline. Now, in order to do so, what the data is showing us is this, that the young people in our schools don't see education as a viable career. For one reason or another, they're not choosing that. And so it would be great for us to create some sort of middle college, high school that is focused around careers in education, whether it's being a teacher, social worker, counselor. And I think Harvard would be a great partner in trying to figure that piece out. When we did surveys of young people in the 2 high schools that are going through transformation, what are the career pathways you'll be interested in seeing in these schools? Literally, education was nowhere on the radar. We've got to change that. So I think there might be, let's talk.
I would also say that there is an upcoming crisis in nonprofit leadership in Boston. We've got some incredibly capable leaders who are either going on to do other things or retiring out of the sector. The pipelines have always been fairly short. I think I'm experiencing that they're dramatically short right now. And so we need to get young people and young professionals connected to organizations that I know they will love, and to see if they start to backfill that pipeline for us. Other questions? We've got some up front here. I hope you have your Fitbit on, man.
Hi, my name is Shannon Simpson. I'm from Boston. I would actually like to know more about how you're going to partner with programs like Teach for America or colleges to ensure that we have capable teachers of all color, but especially white.
I would assume that question is for me.
Yes.
As a former Teach for America core member, I have some great love for Teach for America. I also have concerns about Teach for America, but it's an organization that's transformed me, and so I'm forever indebted to that organization. Teach for America places very few BPS teachers. Boston Public Schools actually does not have a pipeline issue in the sense of just sheer numbers. Like, we get 15 applications for every single job. I mean, our average teacher salary is $92,000. You can get, we have over 140 teachers that are over $100,000. And it's for a career in teaching, this is a great place. And so we haven't, in the last few years, been a big partner for Teach for America, but there are always opportunities because there are always job openings each and every single year, and Teach for America is always part of that pipeline. But we also depend on our relationships with UMass Boston. We recruit nationally, and there are great schools of education throughout the city of Boston. So I think that's part of it. I will say one thing about TFA really quickly. I think is important for those who may not be as familiar with the organization. That organization has gone through a massive transformation over the last several years. The organization is now led by a 1998 core member who grew up in the Rio Grande Valley. And when we talk about the importance of organization being led by women of color, Elisa Villanueva Beard is now this new CEO. You see the organization transform what its mission is, and this year, the organization is finally getting an uptick again in its recruiting, and 70% of the recruits now are individuals of color coming into the organization. So you're seeing a big shift in the organization. I'm kind of proud that that's happening within TFA.
Wonderful. Yes.
Hello, my name is Charmaine Arthur, and I am from representing Freedom House and MDOC. So I have two questions. My first question is to Amanda. You made a statement about how organizations can come together in a more intentional way. You talked about it being somewhat in a social way. I want to be clear, is that what you said? Okay. My question to the panel would be, how do you fix that? Because there are many convenings in Boston. There are many great people sitting at the tables. But we have to prioritize in our day what networks, what convenings are relevant and a priority, because we are overworked, we are in schools, we're in colleges, we're in young people's faces, we're dealing with families, we are constantly going. This is a field that you don't start at 9 a.m. and end at 5. You at any time can expect to leave your office at 8 or 9 o'clock. How do we do that? That makes sense to people's schedules. And also the agenda. That's my first question. How do we get better at that? My second question is to Dr. Chang. You spoke about data and some of the challenges, right, as it pertains to Black and brown students. You talked about the department, the social and emotional piece of BPS. I want to read something real quick because our state is getting a lot of attention with Mystic Valley Charter School and what's going on out there. And we actually, several folks in Boston has gone out to Medford and gone to these hearings to bring a voice. I'm reading something. It says, Black girls don't get to have depression and anxiety. We're told we're emotional, have bad attitudes, rude, and full of complaints. Now, I was that Black girl in high school, but my mother was miles away getting her college degree. My dad and I didn't have the best relationship, but I wanted to learn. But there were some frustrations along with that. Data is telling us that young girls, and actually young boys that look like me, skin tone, are getting pushed out of schools basically for cultural ignorance on the other half. Not knowing us, not being able to serve us. How is BPS addressing that? And how does BPS not become a Mystic Valley school?
Can we take the first question first, and then we'll come back to agenda setting and the tables?
Yeah, I can't answer the first question about work-life balance, so.
No. I just want to take it in reverse order because that's a very powerful question that you asked on the end. I want to make sure that we get some response from the superintendent in particular.
So we're taking a second question first?
Second question
okay,
first.
Let's do a second question. Again, I can't answer a work-life balance question for you. Number one, the young people have actually called us into action around this issue. I've been in Boston for 2 years, and year one, it was very clear that young people were leading this conversation, and they stepped up and they were most courageous. As adults, what are we doing? We're focusing, last year, we started having some deep conversations around racial, linguistic, cultural biases. We started with our executive cabinet, then we went to our cabinet in Boston Public Schools, then went to principals. This year, we're continuing that work. We're in year 2 of that work with our principals, and some of our principals now are kind of stepping forward to have those conversations with their staff. I'm also very proud of some of the partners that have come to the table to help lead some of these conversations within schools, because not all of us are equipped to facilitate these deep questions. And then now this year, we're also having these questions, we're having conversations about some of the systematic biases that exist. We have some systems that need to be dismantled. But the thing is, you can blow it up and blow ourselves up with it, or we can be very, very strategic in making sure that when this work gets done, it can be long sustaining, because this work will last beyond us. And this work will always continue. This year, you might have read about some of this stuff, we're working on decolonizing the curriculum. Like, I am learning about what that really means as well. So creating units of study, we should have by the end of this year a unit. It will be a math history unit that will be designed in a way to quote unquote decolonize the curriculum. And all of us as adults are actually learning and going through this journey together. It is, I said this earlier, it is about heart and mind work. This is very, very courageous work. We appreciate any sort of support people have to give us the permission to continue doing this work, because there will be times where people aren't going to like some of the work that we will be doing, and so we'll need your support during that time.
So we have to wrap up. Let me come to the first part of the question. Sorry if I'm stepping on anybody's toes in answering this. I'm going to do the wrap up and the answer at the same time. So this may get me in a little bit of trouble, because while I'm a proponent of collective impact, I also have a little bit of a critique of collective impact as well. So first of all, I think it's most powerful when we're operating in spaces of systemic fragmentation. And so when we need to create the hub that starts to bring people together, we get a lot of outcomes associated with alignment, associated with the coherence that goes along with that. However, we may fall short of getting to the exponential change that we need. And so from a network standpoint, you need to evolve from this hub model to many worlds of networks. Now, if we do that and we have many networks operating on similar values and a similar set of goals, as Paul said, you don't need to be at every table to do that. And so then it's about figuring out where you are most powerful, where you are playing, and building the leadership to do the appropriate agenda setting, which is part of what Amanda talked about, particularly young people needing to be among those agenda setters. So that's one way to think about it, and I think Boston is evolving in that way. Happy to talk about it more, but we are out of time, and I want to thank you for being a gracious audience, and again, I want to thank our panelists.
I am going to transition us very quickly, but before I do, I am going to ask you just one more time to join me in thanking these speakers. We are headed into the Innovative Design Studios from 1:15 to 3. I have to call out, we are going to be in a different room when we reconvene at 3:15 for our plenary on social enterprise. Please note that we are going to reconvene in the Georgian room at 3:15, and it is on this floor. That will be followed by our TED Talk with Patrick McCarthy and consultancies. So again, for everyone, 3:15 in the Georgian room. Enjoy the next part of the day, everyone.